The Dead Sea is a natural wonder, a biblical landmark. Some experts fear the Dead Sea could be drying up.
Is that coming from the clouds?
I know it's somewhere up there.
The water is gone. Along the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea is retreating faster than any year on record, and what it is leaving behind is not just exposed salt flats and cracked mud. It is something else entirely. A massive stone door, perfectly carved, sealed shut, embedded in the bedrock of the western shore, and it was never supposed to be found. At the same moment, a blood-red cloud settled motionless over Masada for nearly an hour while the air around it stayed completely still. Then came the sound. Not thunder, something lower, older, directed. Witnesses in 3 separate cities all described the same thing. A tone that moved through the walls, through the floor, through the body. And then the sea itself began to glow, not from any known source, not from bioluminescence, just light, rising from the deep. Are these only natural events, or are we watching something that was written about long before any of us were born? If this message speaks to you, leave one word in the comments below, Maranatha, and stay until the end, because what comes next may be the most important detail of all. The Dead Sea is dying, and science knows why. Diversion of the Jordan River, agricultural extraction, industrial mineral harvesting. Decade after decade, the water level has dropped nearly a metre per year. The math is not complicated. The timeline is not hidden. Researchers have documented it. Governments have debated it. The world has mostly moved on. But by early 2026, the rate of retreat had accelerated beyond every existing model. Sections of shoreline that were still submerged 2 years ago now sit exposed under open sky. The ground beneath them fractured into strange geometric patterns, tessellated hexagons of pale salt crust, stretching in every direction as far as the eye can see. From a scientific perspective, this is entirely explainable. Rapid evaporation combined with reduced inflow creates exactly this kind of accelerated recession. Salt crystallization produces tessellated surface patterns. None of it requires anything supernatural. And yet, what the retreating water revealed on the western shoreline near Ein Gedi stopped the survey team cold. Because embedded into the face of the exposed limestone cliff, visible now for the first time, was a door. Not a natural cave, not a collapsed tunnel, a door. The frame was cut with precision that archaeologists on site described as deliberate and uniform. The edges were clean, the depth was consistent, the threshold was level. Someone, at some point in history, cut this opening into the rock and sealed it shut. And then the sea rose and covered it, and it stayed hidden for what carbon dating of surrounding sediment suggests maybe over 2,000 years. No official announcement has been made. Access to the site was restricted within 48 hours, but photographs had already circulated, and those who saw them were asking the same question. What was meant to stay sealed? Because throughout Scripture, the Dead Sea is never just a geographic detail. In Ezekiel 47, the prophet describes a vision of water flowing from the Temple Mount eastward toward the sea, water that would one day make the Dead Sea alive. The sea that cannot sustain life becomes the sea that overflows with it. Not gradually, not symbolically, literally. Fish in its waters, fishermen on its shore. A transformation so complete it defies every natural category. Ezekiel saw this at a time when the sea was full. Now it is emptying, and as it empties, what it hid is beginning to surface. That is not proof of anything, but it is a pattern, and patterns in this place carry weight that is difficult to set aside. At the same time the shoreline was being photographed, something was happening in the sky above Masada. The fortress that once held the last stand of Jewish resistance against Rome, the site that has carried the weight of loss and defiance for nearly 2,000 years, stood beneath a cloud that was not moving. It was red, not the soft amber of a dusty sunset, not the pink of scattered light at dusk, but a deep, saturated red, defined at its edges, dense at its centre, and completely stationary in air that weather sensors confirmed was calm. No front had passed through. No particular event explained the colour. Aircraft in the region reported no anomalous conditions. The cloud simply appeared, held its position for 53 minutes, according to multiple independent recordings, and then dissolved without drifting, without fading through stages, without leaving any residue in the atmosphere. Local meteorologists offered cautious explanations involving inversion layers and dust concentration from the Negev. These are legitimate atmospheric mechanisms. Inversion layers can trap and concentrate particles. Dust from desert terrain can alter the colour of light passing through humid air. All of this is true. But under the conditions recorded that evening, low humidity, steady pressure, the absence of wind, none of those mechanisms fully account for what the data showed. The cloud did not behave like suspended particulate matter. It held a shape. It maintained density. It disappeared rather than dispersing. Several of those who watched described the same sensation. Not fear exactly, but weight, a heaviness in the chest, a sense of being observed rather than observing. In Joel 2:30, the prophet writes of blood and fire and columns of smoke appearing before a great and terrible day. The verse is ancient and it is poetic. It does not require a blood-red cloud above Masada to fulfill it. But when a red formation appears motionless above a site saturated with the memory of last stands and final hours, in the same window of time that a sealed door emerges from a receding sea, the verse does not stay on the page in the same way it did before. And that is not about proof, it is about alignment. And alignment, in this city, in this region, has a way of asking questions that science alone cannot fully answer. Then came the sound. It was not localized. Witnesses in Jerusalem, in Jericho, and in Beersheba. 3 cities that do not share a single seismic zone. 3 populations that had no coordinated reason to report the same experience. All described the same phenomenon within the same 2-hour window. A low frequency tone, sustained, rhythmic at intervals, felt more than heard. Not sharp like an explosion, not rolling like thunder. Several described it as resembling a horn, not a modern instrument, not an electronic signal, but something older, something that seemed to come from everywhere at once and from no specific point at all. Seismic monitoring detected no corresponding ground event. Air traffic control logged nothing. Military sources offered no comment. Infrasound monitoring equipment at a research station near the Dead Sea registered a repeating pulse at a frequency of 111 Hz. The same anomalous reading recorded at other sites of unexplained acoustic phenomena in recent years. Below the threshold of normal hearing, above the range of typical geological noise. Regular, almost deliberate. In 1 Thessalonians 4:16, Paul writes that the Lord will descend with the voice of an archangel and the trumpet of God. Scholars debate whether this language is literal or symbolic, whether it describes a single moment or a progressive sequence. The debate is legitimate and the text does not resolve it simply. But when 3 separate populations in the land where that promise was first proclaimed all describe the same sound on the same night, while a sealed door sits newly exposed at the edge of a receding sea and a motionless red cloud dissolves above an ancient fortress, the question shifts. It is no longer simply, what made that sound? It becomes, why now, and why here, and why all of it together? Because individually, each of these moments has a path back to an explanation. Sounds without visible sources have been recorded across the world for years and remain genuinely unexplained by mainstream science. Unusual clouds form under specific atmospheric conditions. Ancient structures emerge as water levels change. Each one, in isolation, can be filed away, but the accumulation does not file away so easily, and then the sea itself began to glow. After midnight, along the exposed northern shoreline, footage began surfacing from multiple cameras positioned at different angles. The water, what remained of it, dense with salt and mineral concentration, was emitting light, not from the surface, from within. A soft, diffuse illumination rising through the water column, pulsing gently with no corresponding source on the shore, no reflection from above, no bioluminescent organism known to survive in the Dead Sea's extreme salinity. The Dead Sea is called dead for a reason. Its salt concentration is so high that virtually no life survives within it. Not fish, not most bacteria, not bioluminescent algae. The light had no biological explanation. Physicists suggested chemiluminescent reactions between minerals under specific pressure conditions. Geologists noted that subsurface venting along the fault system can produce thermal anomalies. Both possibilities exist, neither fully accounted for the sustained pulsing quality of what the footage showed. What stands out is not any single element of that light, not its colour, not its location, not its duration. What stands out is where it appeared. In Ezekiel's vision of the transformed Dead Sea, the water that flows in from the Temple Mount carries life so thoroughly that the sea changes its nature entirely. What was defined by death becomes defined by abundance. That transformation begins not from the outside, but from within. New water flowing in, the character of the sea altered at its source. A light rising from the floor of the Dead Sea does not fulfill that prophecy, but it carries its imagery in a way that is difficult to ignore when everything else is already shifting. When the stone door was first reported, a former Israeli archaeologist who had worked near Ein Gedi for over 2 decades was asked for comment. He said that he had surveyed that section of cliff face multiple times and never seen anything embedded in the rock. He said the water had been in that position for as long as any modern record showed. He said he did not know what it was, and then he said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. The sea is showing us what it has been keeping. That framing matters, not what was hidden by human hands, not what was buried on purpose, what the sea has been keeping, as though the water itself was the guardian and the retreat of the water was a form of release, timed, measured, and now complete enough to allow a threshold that was never meant to be visible to come into sight. Luke 8:17 says that nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known and brought to light. The verse is not written about archaeology or geology or atmospheric events. It is written about the condition of the heart, about truth that cannot remain suppressed indefinitely. But people who live in this part of the world, who have walked this ground their whole lives and read this text in the language it was first written, are not separating those categories right now. They are holding them together. A door sealed in stone, a sea still retreating, a sound with no source, a cloud that held its position above a place of last stands, and light rising from water that cannot sustain life. Not one of these things proves the return of Christ is imminent. Not one of them, taken alone, demands a spiritual interpretation, but taken together, in this place, in this moment, in a region where prophecy and geography have been converging for 3,000 years, they form a question that is becoming harder to walk away from. Are we watching isolated events that happen to cluster near each other? Or are we watching the early edges of something that has been moving toward this moment for a very long time, and is now close enough to leave its fingerprints on the shoreline? The answer to that question is not available through a single video or a single discovery or a single night of unexplained sound. But the question itself is worth sitting with. Because in Matthew 16:3, Jesus looked at the people of his own time and said, "You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times." That was not a condemnation. It was an invitation to pay attention, to look at what is converging rather than only at what is visible, to ask not just what is happening, but what it is asking of us, right now, in the lives we are actually living, in the decisions that are still in front of us. The Dead Sea is retreating. The door is visible. The sound was heard. The light rose from the deep. Heaven does not announce itself with noise alone. Sometimes it announces itself with a question left in the silence afterward. The only thing left to ask is whether we are listening.